So you want me to forgive? You want me to make amends? That sounds like a pretty scary step. Why in the world would I want to do that? It feels like a monumental part of the process, and it can be scary and sometimes an obstacle that keeps us from working the recovery journey. But man, is it life-changing. One of the greatest keys to sustainable recovery is Principle 6 and Step 8. And today we get to hear from a sister in Christ and her personal experience around these important steps and principles toward the healing journey. Welcome to Hope and Recovery, a Fellowship Celebrate Recovery podcast that shares hope and healing for our mental, spiritual, emotional, and relational journey through life-change stories and recovery topics, all centered around the Beatitudes, where Jesus Christ, through the Celebrate Recovery principles, helps us to face our hurts and even those hang-ups, maybe some lies we're believing about ourselves, God, and others, and our circumstances that may take us into some unhealthy space, some habits, some numbing agents, defenses, protections, some character defects that cause havoc on our relationships with others, and especially our fellowship with God toward healing and new healthy practices. So important. I'm a grateful believer in Jesus Christ. I struggle with drugs and alcohol and perfectionism. My name is Rodney. I'm the pastor and ministry leader of Fellowship Celebrate Recovery in Rogers, and it's so good to be back with you today. What an important journey this is, as we're kind of we've been leaning into the why behind the steps and the principles. And this week, we have the privilege of hearing from one of our sisters in Christ who has an incredible journey and has a lot of fruit in her life as a result of working this important Principle 6 and Step 8. And she has agreed to come on and have a great conversation with us today. And so, Renee, thanks so much for being here.
I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. Introduce yourself the way you do in recovery, and we'll jump in.
I am a grateful follower of Jesus Christ, and I struggle with codependency, anxiety, grief, and pride. And my name is Renee.
Hey, Renee. And thank you so much for being a part of this. You have an amazing story, and if you've never heard her story, you would be blessed. Just God's story, a lot of life change in your story, Renee. But so this Principle 6, and I just want to read that to kind of get our listeners' hearts around this. Principle 6 is evaluate all my relationships, offer forgiveness to those who have hurt me, and make amends for harm I've done to others when possible, except when to do so would harm them or others. And the Beatitudes, blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy, Matthew 5:7. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. That's in Matthew 5, verse 9. And then in Step 8, we made a list of all persons we had harmed, and became willing to make amends to them all. And then Luke 6:31 is a corresponding verse, do to others as you would have them do to you. So this is typically pretty scary for people to think about. And I'd love to start there, Renee, as you think about how long you've been in recovery now?
7 years.
7 years, mm-hmm. Yeah. That's a long time. There's a lot of sobriety there, mm-hmm. right? Lots of good roots there. When you came in, if you can recall, when you first, and we read these in our general meetings, when you read Principle 6 and Step 8 for the first time in the corporate setting, what in the heck was happening in Renee's heart?
You know, the funny thing is, when I first heard all of them, I was so stuck at the beginning because I was so prideful that I could figure this out and I was going to make everything work okay. And so I didn't even hear the final steps. I was stuck on having to admit that my life was unmanageable to myself, much less other people. And then to have to believe that God actually cared about my recovery. Those two things were so prevalent when I first walked in that I didn't even hear 6. And it's probably, if I had focused on needing to forgive and amend at the beginning, I might not have stayed.
Been overwhelming.
Yeah, because it was so much for me. But God used the beginning, me admitting I'm not God.
Yeah.
I had to get humble. I had to go, okay, I was 50 years old. Okay.
Yeah.
So I had plenty of time to mess everything up. I had plenty of time to try everything you could possibly try. And I had to finally literally get on my knees and say, okay, God, I've done this too long myself. And mostly because of my relationships. I had pretty much surrendered everything else by the time I got here. But my love life, my relationships, that was a part of me I did not want to.
Well, and I know a lot more of your story, and obviously we don't have time to unpack it all, but I'd love for you, as much as you feel comfortable, give us a snapshot of, I love that, such an important thing what you just said. That principle one is so essential, is I had to get on my knees and surrender. It's letting go. But give us a picture of what Renee walked in here with, just so we have context of just an idea of what your life was like just in those 50 years.
I was a Christian from an early age. So I grew up in church. I believed in Jesus. I followed him until college. But in the middle of all that, I was definitely convinced by childhood hurts that I had to earn other people's love for me. Like I had to people please, and I became a chameleon. I literally changed my values, my whatever, if that made me belong somewhere. Like that was my goal, is like everybody had to love me. And if somebody didn't, then I would work, manipulate, do whatever I could to try to earn that love. So that's an emotional roller coaster.
Yeah.
That I was on, and people would call me this force of nature. Yeah. It was the Renee show. So I could go in and charm and act like I was all cool and I was something, and I would be the life of the party. And, but inside I didn't have any true relationships because they were based on these facades that I put up.
Yeah. Kind of surface relationships.
Yes. Yeah. So even though I had a lot of friends, were they really deep friendships? Were they friendships with the real me? I didn't even know who the real me was.
Kind of keeping people at a distance.
Correct.
So I'm curious with that, Renee, because I think it's so important, and it kind of leans into this principle and step. When did you first learn that you had to be that for other people, right? I'm guessing there's some wounds there growing up that we learn, and doesn't mean it makes them right, but it helps us understand why we do what we do. So when did that become kind of your strategy for surviving it? I'm guessing it probably kept you alive.
Right. Early.
Yeah.
And I have great parents who love Jesus, and did the best they could with what they had, but they both had broken. And so my dad never really expressed what he felt about me in words and actions that I understood as a kid. Now looking back, there were all kinds of ways my dad was trying to tell me, but he just didn't know how. He had a hard time getting in touch with his own emotions. So sharing them with someone else just was hard for him. So I didn't have that coming from him. And then my mom is very ordered and organized, and she has a certain way that she needs things to be comfortable. And so as a very young child, I was the opposite of everything that she, was. I was a free spirit. I wasn't organized. I was kind of like ADHD, a pinball in a pinball machine. And so for her, that was very difficult to manage.
Yeah.
And so we fought from day one over everything.
Yeah.
And so it was not a positive relationship, yet I knew she loved me.
Yeah.
I had no doubt my mom loved me, and we had great moments of music. She taught me to love and appreciate music, but I knew she loved me, but yet it felt like she didn't like anything about me. Mm-hmm. And I think somewhere that was where that was the great lie that Satan told me through her, and then through person after person after person, is like they could love me but hate everything about me. And so I was constantly trying to fix what they didn't like about me. That's the trick.
That's the interesting, and we've talked about this with codependency. It's almost like there's a sense of control in that, right? We demand, there's almost a sense of demanding that people approve of us and like us. But so the family of origin, a lot there. And then how did that play out in your life going into adult life and the relationships and all that, just that need to keep everyone happy and kind of that chameleon that you talked about?
Right. Well, it was exhausting. And I never had any confidence. I was a very accomplished, looking back, I was a very accomplished kid. I was a very accomplished student, straight A's, first band, first chair, all region, French horn player. Like, you look at anything I attempted to do and I did it very well. Yeah. But yet I felt completely worthless, that it was never going to be good enough. And then I carried that insecurity into school. So I did not have, friendships like I thought I should. I was never popular. I was friends with a lot of like in high school, all the popular girls, they were my friends.
Right.
The homecoming queen, the day she got to high school, I was the welcoming committee that introduced her to everyone. Like, I was this, looking back, this really kind-hearted, always looking out for that person. Hey, she's new. She doesn't know anybody. So there was a good part to me, but I was so insecure. And I realize now that they weren't the reason.
Right.
I was the reason.
Yeah.
But I blamed everyone else. I'm like, just thinking, well, I don't know. I believed there was something inherently wrong with me.
Yeah.
That's kind of the belief that carried into college. So I'm like, oh, I'm at a new place. It'll change. No, it was still me.
Yeah.
I was still walking in with the broken me, still trying to earn everybody's, love and whatever. And so by the time I got to college, I had followed Jesus all along, but I get to this Christian college and I'm still not popular. I'm still not all the things I thought were important.
Yeah.
So the party crowd became they accepted me as long as I was partying with them, then I was cool. And that kind of started that journey, which led me to singing in a band in bars. And I was traveling around to different, cities, singing in a band, and terrible environment for a Christian girl. But I wasn't following Jesus anymore. So it was just kind of this path that started from me just trying to find a place where I could be accepted and feel like I belonged.
Wow.
So that's how I ended up, by the time I was an adult, I married a guy I met when I was singing in the bars. So great place to meet your future spouse. And so you can imagine like that. He didn't even believe in God when I met him.
Recipe for disaster.
Yeah. So all the red flags were there. I knew better. I'd been taught right, but I was so desperate to just be loved that I just kept trying all the things, all the wrong things to find that place of belonging.
Yeah. So don't have time to unpack that fully, but lots of dysfunction in the marriage and some abuse and I mean, just all kinds of hurt there. And maybe there's some of that comes out in this conversation as much as you feel comfortable. But so you get in, you have all this stuff, family of origin, college hurt, marriage hurt, and ups and downs that come with that. Now you're getting into a step study small group. You're beginning, and I love the way you preface this, I had to come to this full surrender, get on my knees. God, I need you. I can't do this. So you begin this process. You're coming to Friday night, they're doing the general meeting, you're getting to a step study, open share. What is that process like as you're moving into this important principle 6 and step 8 for you, Renee?
Time-wise, I can't tell you exactly, but in my first step study, I was writing my inventory and starting to see this pattern. Like, I would have told you, like, oh, all the guys I dated that I had long-term relationships with were very different. No, they weren't. They all had the same kind of broken, which my brokenness was attracted to, and it just exacerbated my broken. Like, it was just this mess. And so I started realizing this, because before that I blamed myself until my inventory, until my first step study. I was convinced all my relationships were that way because of me. Because I was just inherently messed up. So that's why I keep getting abused, because I'm such an awful wife. I'm such a terrible girlfriend. I'm such a terrible daughter. Like I absolutely was convinced because I was just messed up.
Wow.
So to get in that inventory and start really digging into it and seeing that there was a pattern, and seeing that when I got to the column where when I looked especially at the abuse, because I went through horrible abuse for 16 years.
Goodness.
I kept going back because I wanted to be loved.
Yeah.
But when I looked at all that for the first time and I'm in this column and I'm like, what was my fault? And it was like, it wasn't. It was the first time that I finally saw, like, all these years since I can remember, I had believed the lie that there was something inherently wrong with me and I was not lovable. And suddenly that one thing I was not responsible for the abuse. That right there started changing me. It started letting me see my life in a different perspective. So that was the beginning of me saying, okay, I am not the reason, but I've had responses that were not okay. Yeah. I was terribly disrespectful and hateful to my mother in my teen years. And then when I got out of college, I just left. I moved as far away as I could get, came home very little, communicated very little, partially because my relationship was isolating me, as relationships like that do, but I had a choice. And so things like that, I was starting to realize, okay, I wasn't responsible for what they did, but I was certainly responsible for how I responded. Yeah. So that was the beginning of me starting to face these steps.
Wow. Yeah. So much there. And I appreciate your vulnerability up. Talking with Renee just around Principle 6 and Step 8. Great conversation. When we come back, we'll continue the conversation here in a little bit of her story around these important principle and step for our recovery journey. Stick with me. I'll be right back. Hey friends, if you're looking for a meeting here in Northwest Arkansas, please don't try to face your hurts, hangups, and habits and relationship struggles on your own. We've got people ready to serve and walk alongside this journey with you here. Fellowship Fayetteville, Celebrate Recovery, and Fellowship Rogers, Celebrate Recovery. We meet every Friday night starting at 6 p.m. for a Connection Cafe meal, and then we go into our main meeting at 7 p.m. Here on our campuses. We hope that you'll join us. If you'd like more information, go to fellowshipcr.org. We hope to see you this Friday night. Welcome back. Renee, thank you. Your vulnerability is inspiring. I'm confident somebody's listening right now and they're encouraged. So I appreciate your honesty and your vulnerability. But so you're learning a lot. I mean, there's so much that you unpacked right before the break. One thing that was interesting that just hit me, you're talking about I grew up, I learned from a young age that it was my job to keep everyone around me happy. It's one thing to have a mindset of keeping everyone happy. And then the next layer of the pain that just kind of hit me is I'm not only thinking I've got to keep everyone happy, but if they're abusing me, it's my fault. It must mean that I'm making them unhappy, that it's my fault. They both kind of point to, I must be defective. If I can't keep you happy, something's wrong with me. And if I make you unhappy to the point where you have to abuse me, then I must really, really suck, right? And just
Yep.
That's a hard place.
That was it. And I lived in that place for, a long time, decades. I just lived like that. And there was that constant weight. That's where the anxiety came from. I had anxiety, just terrible, terrible anxiety from as long as I can remember. And that also came from that feeling. I'm very empathic. I feel, you can tell me you're okay, but if you're not, I know it. And so as a kid, I started taking that on. Oh, mom's unhappy. It's my fault. Dad's dad's grumpy. It's my fault. Constantly trying to find a way to fix that. And so that I just carried that into my relationships. So even in my friendships, I think a lot of my friendships, I was doing the same thing. I didn't see it, but I was always taking the blame. Yeah. It's always my fault. Yeah. Even when it wasn't my responsibility, that I had no way of being responsible for it. I still took responsibility for it. So it's a huge roller coaster because if people are happy with me, I like me. If people are not happy with me, I hate me. And it's a horrible way to live. It really is. It's
heartbreaking. I mean, and I know statistically, there's many people in that scenario, and it's heartbreaking. And it's good just to mention right there, if you're in an unsafe situation, it's okay to get out of that situation. Yes. Just want you to hear that. Seek help, seek resources. But so Renee, one of the things, and you're really inviting us into some incredible parts of your story. One of the things that I hear from people is, especially early in the process, and you said it yourself, if amends and forgiveness was what we were talking about day one, I'd probably be out. There's a reason why there's a process to get to that. We call them steps and principles. We progress through them. There's a reason why we don't cover principle 6 and step 8, day one. But one of the things I hear from people, maybe you can speak into, is how can you even come to a place to forgive someone for such atrocious acts? I mean, almost feeling justified in holding bitterness and resentment. It would make sense, right? Why would I even want to put my heart out there to even consider forgiving somebody for doing such atrocious things to this young woman that you didn't deserve? And what's the value of coming to a place of forgiveness for someone like that?
Well, I mean, you hit it on the head. When I finally got to that forgiveness lesson, and of course, like you said, God had brought me through a lot of things to get to the point where I was ready to hear that. But when I got to that lesson, I have very frank, open relationship. I tell God, if I'm not liking this, I'm going to tell you. And I've had some pretty, a little upset with him, and
he's big enough for that.
Yeah,
right?
I was definitely having that talk with him. Like, okay, I'm listening to these forgiveness questions, and I get that that's a huge part. I've heard it before. I'd been in church through sermon series when I was married to my ex, where I was supposed to forgive him, and I walked across a bridge of forgiveness. I tried all this stuff, counseling, everything, and yet I still did not feel forgiveness. Now, I had let things go. I tended to make excuses for him when he hurt me, and for anybody that did. So that's not forgiveness either. Pretending like it never really happened. Did that all the time. I'd take a beating and get up the next day and everything's fine. And
minimize it a little bit.
Yeah, so that wasn't it either. So I'm dealing with, I know this is important, and I know that God even says, you got to do this.
Yeah.
But I'm telling him, like, how I did wear it as a I survived all this abuse. I was always doing the right thing, which is also a lie. So why should I forgive them? Like, why? When especially most of the people that did the horrible things to me aren't sorry. They're never going to say, I'm sorry. They're never going to face, at least I have not seen that kind of, repentance from them.
Yeah.
And so how in the world am I supposed to let that go? My sense of justice, like you said, is I've always fought for the little guy. And right now I'm the little guy. So why should I be? And as I'm having this conversation with God, I have this picture come to my head of Jesus on the cross in that scene from The Passion of the Christ. Because that's the one picture, like every time I think of the crucifixion now, I can't get just the gruesome death that Jesus went through. And this is the picture that comes to my mind as I'm praying. And I almost heard God say, so this wasn't enough for you. Whew. And I was like, man, hold on now. But and I think I'd probably heard it said in CR, or God just brought it to me, like, Jesus died for them too. Like, I know I've now started to accept that Jesus died for me. And I think that was a huge part of it too. I was finally starting to internalize the love of God and just how much he loves me, not the world, me. When I finally started internalizing that changed how I saw all this too. So as he's bringing this picture to my head, I've now started to understand his love and putting Jesus on that cross in the first place. So now it's kind of like, yeah, you put up with abuse, but is this not enough payment? Are you saying Jesus didn't do enough? And I was like, well, no, I'm not saying that, So if he already paid for it, then what else are you asking for? Because if you're not asking for anything else, then let it go.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, wow, this is between Jesus and them. Like, he already took care of it for them. Now that's between them, how they deal with that. But I don't need to do anything with it. I can just let it go. Just give it to Jesus and let him work it out with those people. And it was like almost immediate. This feeling, I can feel it now, this just huge weight came off of my shoulders, and years of resentment that I would have told you I didn't have. Oh, I'm a really forgiving person. No, I was just pretending like none of it happened. But that doesn't mean you let it go. It's there. It's just, it just weighed me down. It was just kind of hanging on me, and it was affecting my relationships now.
Yeah.
So in that moment, I was like, oh yes, thank you, Jesus. It's all yours. I am not going to hold on to it anymore. And it almost immediately started getting me to see these people with compassion. That, wait, they're broken too.
Yeah.
They've gone through heartache and pain just like I have. They need Jesus just like I do. So I'm no better than them.
Yeah.
And that helped me let it go there.
That's amazing. Well, and even earlier when you were talking about your dad, I mean, I could hear the fruit of your recovery in that statement. You said, I know he did the best he could, right? And we want to be careful. Sometimes people say, well, I'm going to minimize my pain because, well, they did the best they could. That's not what I'm hearing in your heart as you say that today. It's you have worked your recovery, and now you have a different perspective about your dad as you've healed the wounds. You got honest about the wounds and all that. So that's important distinction there.
Correct.
But so one of the things, Renee, that's interesting, especially with a story like yours, there's a lot of, when we look at the cross, all the things done to you are nailed to the cross. It feels almost, and I'd love to hear your heart in this, it feels weird to say, okay, thank you for taking that. Thank you for helping me to learn how to forgive. But what is your part now, Renee? Right? What's the part that you need to own in your recovery? Not that you need to justify and say, well, maybe it was my fault for the abuse. Not that specifically, but through the recovery process, there's the other side of the coin of Principle 6 and Step 8, and that's the amends. How does that play into knowing all these bad things happened to you, even as a little girl? And how do you make that distinction of, I have a part to own in my recovery? What's that look like?
Well, I spent a lot of time blaming everybody else for all I knew I did a bunch of ridiculously stupid things, but I could give you an excuse for every one of them because that person hurt me or because that happened. So there was a ton of blame going on, and it kind of took the responsibility off of me to even deal with my own stuff. And there's that pride that would come in. Oh, I'm not going to admit to anybody my stuff. So sitting in that first step study where it's like all these ladies are like bearing their souls. And all I'm thinking is, well, as soon as I tell them some of the depravity that I went through to try to get people to love me, they are going to reject me. These are Christian women. They're going to be the first people to, backbite or gossip or any of those things. I was just so sure that was going to happen. And so when I finally started opening up about these things and all I got was love, that also changed me a great deal too. To know that I could sit in a group of Christian sisters and they weren't gonna even like be shocked or only reaction was grace. And
that's incredible.
Yeah. When you get that kind of grace, then it's like, well, who am I not to give grace to other people then?
Yeah.
And so that also changed my perspective that there are safe spaces in church. Because honestly, I kind of felt up to that point that churches were the least safe space because the party crowd always, hey, they loved and accepted me as messed up as I was.
Right.
But it's not the same kind of love.
Yeah.
And so this was the first time I was like, and I remember thinking one night sitting in step study, something happened. And I remember thinking, this is the love of Jesus. I don't think I've ever experienced it like this before.
Wow.
So that also changed me. Because when other people give me grace, I feel like, well, I should be giving it to other people too. Between Jesus giving it to me and then these other sisters giving it to me, it began to open the doors for me to see other people as broken.
Yeah.
I've had experiences. I've been at the grocery store and had somebody be really rude to me. And in my head, I'm thinking, I wonder what would be on their inventory. And that's kind of how I picture people as these people that just need Jesus.
Yeah.
They just need healing like I did.
We're all broken.
Yeah. And it just makes it so much easier to live in a state of grace and mercy. And it's such a relief.
Yeah.
It's such a relief not to have that weight of responsibility of everybody else's feelings, but also the weight of the unforgiveness hanging on me. It just really changed how I acted around people. So now it's just my relationships with every human is different now because of this work, because I don't care what people think about me anymore.
Yeah.
Which is, it sounds kind of crass, but I care what Jesus thinks of me.
Yeah.
And that, he loves me, period. Like, I don't have to earn it.
Yeah.
I don't have to do better. I don't have to be a good little Christian. All the things that I thought my whole life. He already loves me.
Yeah.
He just wants me to live my best life.
Yeah.
So following his way is not about earning some kind of whatever from him. It's literally him leading me to the best life. And so, so that once I do that, all my other relationships are now, it's since I'm not living my life trying to make those people love me, it's such an easier, I now find love way more often than when I was looking for it.
Yeah,
way
that's
more.
so good. You know, and it is interesting too. You know, you were talking about those barriers of, you know, I can't forgive them because they're not ever going to be sorry for that. So that can be something that can be a roadblock that keeps us from forgiving. One of those other things I think is a roadblock is we forget our own fallenness. And that can be a barrier, a roadblock to forgiveness. And it is interesting, just the progression through Celebrate Recovery. We hit the amends lesson before we hit the forgiveness lesson. That's not a mistake, right? It's, I got to recognize my own fallenness and address my side of the street, not specifically to abuse. And there's nothing in the abuse that was your fault if you're listening. There's absolutely nothing you did that would warrant the physical, verbal, emotional, sexual abuse. I want to be clear on that. But because of your upbringing and all the stuff that you've gone through, not to blame, but to understand. Exactly. I want to understand my story, and that's the value of Principle 4, doing the inventory hard work, so that we can understand our part and what are the things I'm starting to do, the people pleasing, right, that was carried over into college and marriage and all that. It's owning your part in your side of the street, which then I'm guessing became a catalyst to be able to get to that forgiveness piece a little bit more effectively. I wonder if you could speak to that.
Yeah. Yeah, because I had so much pride that I wasn't even facing my own stuff so much. And so once I did that, it was, it was eye-opening, but it was not hard for me. I wanted to go make things right with people. And God he brought that to me like a little at a time. Sometimes totally unexpected, like to go to a location for my teen years, and it reminding me that my teenage best friend, we kind of had a falling out, and it was never really discussed or anything, but she's still in town. So I called her up, let's go to lunch. And at lunch, I was able to say, hey, I started making horrible choices when we were friends, and I was dragging you into drinking and alcohol and things that you were not interested in. And you did the absolute right thing by cutting our friendship off. And to have her start crying and saying, I've always felt so bad about the way things happen, but I didn't know what else to do. And it was just like such this cleansing moment to have something I hadn't even thought about in years, 25 years or 30 years. I haven't even thought about this situation, but God brought it to my mind. I had the opportunity, and that gave her the opportunity to say, I felt bad too. And I think once I started making amends, I just want to make more. I want things to be right with other people, because it makes things more right with God with me. If I know I get everything right with everybody else, I have a much clearer path to like approaching Jesus in the morning.
Yeah. Keep short accounts.
Yes. So it's something beautiful that I try to do on a regular basis. As soon as it's brought to my mind, like, ooh, that probably wasn't a good idea, I try to immediately do something about that. Yeah.
Well, and you're giving us such great, one of my questions was, what's the fruit? But you're telling me the fruit. I mean, it's everything you're talking about, your relationships and keeping short accounts and just that peace. And I see it in you, Renee, just as you lead worship as well. But I see you with young women and just how you interact with people in the ministry. You're a great leader for us, and incredible fruit. Renee, is somebody's listening, and they're Renee, maybe of 20 years ago, or maybe 5 years ago, or maybe they're right in this season right now. What do you, because your words, having walked this path, and being able to walk through forgiveness and amends through this recovery process to face some really scary parts of our life and our heart. What do you say to someone that is in that and maybe they're scared to face this principle and step?
To me, the first thing that you got to hear is that God loves you and that you are a masterpiece. And if I could not have said that about myself 10 years ago, I would have just almost laughed at myself for trying to say that. But God doesn't make junk. And so no matter what mistakes you've made, I mean, I made plenty. I made so many mistakes. That did not change the fact that God created me for a purpose and I'm special and I'm unique and very much loved. And I think that's the first thing that everybody has to hear. If you don't get God's love and how much he cares for you, I don't know that the rest of it is possible.
Yeah.
You got to understand how special and important you are. And that's the first thing. Once you get that, being able to admit that you've screwed some things up, that is just, I don't even know how to explain it. That humility is the only reason that I can have the kind of relationship I can have with Jesus now. Because as long as I was like, well, I got this, or, I don't need any help. That was me. I don't need to admit that I need help. I'm not going to admit to anybody that I need help, that my marriage is still a mess, that, name it. As long as I was doing that, I didn't give Jesus space to do what he can do.
Right.
And so I never dreamed, like when I came to Celebrate Recovery, it was like, I just don't want to live in abuse anymore. Like I just want to live my life alone.
Yeah.
Without all the mess. God, if you can just help me, very basic. I just want to keep my own money and not give it to people.
Yeah.
I was doing all these stupid things to just get love. I'm like, I just want a relationship with you and not to be in pain. If you can just give me that, I'll be good. But gosh, he had so much more out there waiting for me, but I had to let go. I had to let him take over everything, including my relationships. And that was the one thing I never wanted. What? Do it God's way? Like, you mean no sex? What? Like, that's the kind of stuff I would say. Well, that's what God wants you to do, but come on.
Yeah.
Who does that?
Yeah.
Right? Well, I did it the right way with my now husband for the first and only time in my life. I'm 58 years old. I finally did a relationship following God's rules. And we have such a peaceful life. We have such a life of support and love and grace and mercy and all the things in our home that I didn't think I could have with another person.
Wow.
But I couldn't have had that if I didn't go through this process. If I did not forgive my exes, I could not love my husband the way I can love him now. I wouldn't have had that freedom because all that stuff was hanging over me.
Wow.
So I would just encourage people to know it sounds scary, but there is another life out there waiting for you. It wasn't too late for me at 50. It's not too late for anybody to just embrace the life that God has, but you got to let him do it.
That's awesome.
That's the secret.
Well, Renee, I just want to hug you. I just love you so much, and I appreciate your heart. And it takes a lot of courage to come on and share part of our story. And those of you that don't know her, you can take my word for it. She's just a true woman of God, and just admire you so much, Renee. Thanks so much for being you and for what you've overcome. You didn't deserve what happened to you. You deserved better, and I'm so proud of you.
But God uses it. That's the amazing thing about this. I am so, that's why I'm happy to do something like this, because I want everyone to find this freedom.
Well, I know you brought hope to our listeners. So thank you so much for being with us today. Grateful for you. Well, if you're not blessed, you haven't been listening. What an incredible story. And here's the thing. Renee said it so beautifully. Sometimes we come into this space trying to get away from whatever that thing that's causing havoc, the events that have caused havoc and pain in our life. And it makes sense that you want to get away from that. But as Renee articulated, it's much more. The gospel message is not just getting us away from that stuff that was nailed to the cross, but moving us toward the fruit and the benefits, the gifts that Jesus has to offer that's so much greater, so much better than anything that we're coming from. God will not waste the hurts in your life. if we'll just turn it over to Him and trust Him, make a decision, and then trust Him with the process and the healing recovery journey. And I pray that you don't try to face that alone. Hey, thanks so much for joining me as always. Such a blessing to have you, and I pray that you'll join me next time. Until then, God bless you guys.